Good morning. Happy Sabbath. Welcome back to the Tabernacle Seventh-day Adventist Church online worship service. I'm glad you've chosen to join us today as we delve into part 2 of our sermon series, In the Storm. Today we're looking at the story of the Apostle Paul and his shipwreck on the island of Malta. You can find the story in Acts chapters 27 and 28. A few years ago, I was on the island of Fiji on a mission trip, and we took a day out from all the typical busyness of mission trips to go do some sightseeing. We were going to go to a school on one of the smaller outlying islands. We were going to play with the kids, eat lunch together, spend some time snorkeling on the beautiful beach there, and then come back. It was a beautiful day. The weather was perfect, and so we headed out in a van to the place we were going to meet the boat. The trip had been described to me as a boat cruise. Now, I don't especially like boats. I get seasick very easily, but I'm assuming we'll be on some kind of ferry boat, and so it'll be fine. We arrive, and I start looking around for the dock where this big ferry boat might be, and there is no dock. Instead, in shallow water of the bay, there is what I would describe as a ski boat. A little speedboat about the same size that you would wakeboard or water ski behind in a lake. And we're going to go out on the open ocean in this very small boat. It's just big enough for our group of about 10 students and teachers and the crew of 2 who we've rented the boat from. We wade out into the water, we hop on the boat, and we get going. And at first, it's going fast, we're skimming across the water, everything is fine. But then we start to slow down, and then we stop. They are having issues with the engine on our boat. I look up and look around, and there is no land as far as the eye can see. We are prisoners of the ocean. Paul is a prisoner. He has appealed to Caesar, and so he is on his way in chains to Rome. This is no sunshiny day boat cruise to a close-by island. They have already encountered setbacks and unexpected delays. We're told in Acts chapter 27, verse 9, that the weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall. And historical sources tell us that the Romans considered sailing after September 15 doubtful and after November 11 suicidal. The verse dates this. It says it was after the festival, so we know that we are within this window of time. It is a risky voyage in the best of settings. Paul warns his captors and his crew that this journey will bring great loss. Yet they push ahead, and soon there is no land as far as the eye can see. They prepare for rough seas, chapter 27, verse 17, by passing ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. Despite Paul's warnings and the crew's preparation, they soon find themselves driven before the wind, taking a violent battering, throwing cargo overboard. Verse 20 tells us, the terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and stars until at last all hope was gone. For ancient sailors, the sun and stars are their global positioning system, their GPS, and without these there is no navigation. After many days with no direction and no way to tell where they're going, they lose all hope. They are entirely at the mercy of the wind and sea. What are you at the mercy of today? The winds of news media, the waves of worry and anxiety, the navigational control of a stimulus check. Our world is full of uncertainty right now, and it feels like our anchors have been cut loose. The temptation is to do what the crew of Paul's ship did, to lose hope. But Paul knows, and he reminds his crew that God cares for us in the storm. He isn't about to let his crew surrender. Paul called the crew together and said, "Take courage. None of you will lose your lives. For last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. And he said, 'Don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God.'" God has the ability to grant safety, not just to Paul and his compatriots, but to us today. Take courage. Believe God. This moment, this storm that we're in right now feels dark. And sometimes it feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, no hope on the horizon, yet God cares for us in the storm. One commentary says about this passage, "In the darkest moment, when all human help is past, God enters the chaos and brings hope." Verse 27. About midnight on the 14th night of the storm, the sailors sensed land was near. The water is getting shallower and shallower. Paul encourages the crew to eat. He admonishes everyone to stick together. The story continues in verse 39. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could make it to shore. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim to shore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Everyone escaped safely to shore. Everyone in that little speedboat in Fiji also escaped safely to shore. Our crew of two MacGyvered the engine, got it going together, and they took us to our destination. They took a little detour to show us the island where Castaway had been filmed, which made me feel so much better about the whole situation. And then they dropped us off on the island of Manna and went to go get the engine fixed. God cares for us in the storm. Once Paul and his compatriots are safely to shore, they learned that they were on the island of Malta. The people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, almost sounds like Portland at times. So they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the hand. But Paul shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw that he wasn't harmed, they changed their minds. God cares for us in the storm and beyond. We got to the island of Manna where we were headed. We visited with the lovely children at the Manna Adventist School. We hung out and snorkeled on the beautiful beach there. And then we climbed into the same, now fixed boat. This time we did not stop in the middle of the ocean, but we did encounter rough seas. Two of our group smacked into the side of the boat and were cut and a little banged up in the process. They were small cuts, but it wasn't the most sanitary situation on that boat, and so we were a little worried about them. But you know what? God had provided. We had a nursing major along with us, and she had brought a first aid kit. God cares for us in the storm and beyond. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the hand. When was the last time you hurt your hand? Maybe you were chopping something and accidentally got a little cut or a paper cut at the office. Maybe you burned yourself on a pot on the stove or a curling iron or a hot glue gun. I have never been bit by a snake, but I imagine that it would hurt as much or more than those common injuries. Paul barely seems to pay attention to this painful thing. He shakes it off. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the hand. But Paul shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead, but when they had waited a long time and saw that he wasn't harmed, they changed their minds. What can we do today? What lessons can we learn from this story of the storm, from this story of Paul and how he weathers this storm? God cares for us in the storm and beyond. Today, if you're like me and you feel like you're in the midst of a storm, or even if you're doing okay right now, know that God cares for us in the midst of the storm, but also beyond. So what can we do today? We can heed warnings. If the captain had paid attention to Paul's warning at the very beginning of this story, in chapter 27, verse 10, it would have been a very different story. We're doing this right now. We're having online church rather than meeting together. We're washing our hands. We're wearing masks, all in an attempt to heed warnings. And I want to encourage you to keep it up. We can also shake it off. Like Paul with the viper, there are some things that we can shake off. Not everything that seems like a crisis in the moment actually is one. Eat a snack, take a nap. That's a reference to last week's sermon if you didn't get it. Give it a little time. As believers, God's hand is on our lives. And like Paul's experience with the viper, our actions, our lives have the ability to change other people's minds. Sometimes shaking it off, letting something go even when we don't want to, is the healthiest thing we can possibly do. Third, we can have courage. We serve a mighty God who is able to bring us through anything. Even this, especially this. Acts chapter 27:25 says, "Keep up your courage, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me." God is in control of this thing we call life. I want to remind you of that quote we read earlier from a commentary. In the darkest moment, when all human help is past, God enters the chaos and brings hope. He can do the same thing for you. God cares for you in the storm and beyond. Pray with me. Father, some of us feel like we are in the storm today. Care for us. Help us to feel your presence and know that we can trust you no matter what. And Lord, be with us as we try to heed warnings, as we try to shake it off, and as we try to bring all of our problems to you. Thank you for being a God who loves us, who cares about us, and is with us in the storm. Amen.